Okay, I just want to welcome everyone to our November 19th Century Baseball Speaker Series. This is our third so far this year, and we're doing an academic year. As I mentioned in the past, it's kind of from September through May, and we'll have a presentation each month. This is Bob Bailey's
God damn.
brainchild, and he really put this together, and it's a really popular thing. I want to thank Bob for that, and also I'm going to turn it over to him right now, and so he's going to introduce Larry and a little bit about his topic, and I'll say a few words at the end. And Bob, go ahead. Your little housekeeping, right?
Larry, I need you to I can't get to my controls the way you've got this. Can you hear me at all, Peter?
Yes, I can.
Okay, I'm going to speak up. To start with the usual openings for tonight, please mute yourself as we go forward. If you have a question or a comment, please use the chat function. Run your cursor to the bottom of the black screen, hit chat, and a box will show up at the bottom right where you can type in any comments or questions, and we'll address them to the speaker at the end of the session. Let me introduce our speaker. Tonight it's Larry Phillips. Larry grew up in Cincinnati and attended the University of Cincinnati, as did two other baseball worthies. It was Sandy Koufax and me. I don't know whatever happened to Koufax, but Larry had a 37-year career with GE Aviation in Cincinnati, and for 2/4 of her time in engineering school at Purdue. My daughter worked at GE Aviation doing testing if a mess of pigeons ran into an engine, if it would stall out. She learned so much. Larry is active in the Hoyt Allen SABR chapter. And this past year, he's one of the judges for the annual Casey Award presented by Spitball magazine. He's also active in the Cincinnati Vintage Baseball Club. Tonight, Larry will speak on early baseball in Cincinnati. And by early, he means before the 1869 Red Stockings. His research grew out of material that appeared in Baseball Pioneers, a work that many of our 19th century committee members contributed to. So we'll let you,
Can you hear me?
Larry, take us back to the banks of the Ohio River in 1858. Larry, it's all yours. Larry, you can start. Okay, you can start, Larry.
Okay,
you can start.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, well, I can hear you on the phone, but you need.
I can hear you on the computer. I can hear you on our computer.
I'm sorry, but can the audience hear me?
Peter, can you hear him?
Yes, I'm the audience. I can hear you.
Okay, you're doing fine. So just put the phone down and we'll get started.
Okay, all right. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank Peter and Bob for allowing me to present this information that I found. I apologize for the technical problems. So to get started, I'm sure that many of you will recognize this graphic. It's from the New York Clipper newspaper. Now, on July 20th in 1858, the first of 3 scheduled All-Star matches were to be played at the Fashion Racecourse in New York City. The teams were comprised of the best players of the top clubs of the city. An estimated crowd of between 4,000 and 10,000 people attended, and they were even willing to pay an entrance fee to see a baseball match. The event was recorded in the city's newspapers, noting the players' performance in what today we call box scores. And within days, the game results were known throughout the country. 3 days later, 635 miles to the west in Cincinnati, Ohio, a baseball match also occurred, but with a lot less coverage. This illustration appeared in Harper's Magazine in July of 1857, and it provides an excellent view of one of Cincinnati's attributes for which it is known, the city of seven hills. You can see how the hills surround the basin area. There is a break here where a creek runs through, and then on the left side, there's also more hills. So this is important because this geographical feature produced a basin about 1 mile deep and 2 miles wide, where the city first developed because only the wealthy could afford to live up on the top of the hills and escape the crowded and polluted conditions. Access to the Ohio River was key, as it provided easy transportation of materials and was the ideal location for factories. And of course, this generated jobs. The 1850 US Census placed the city's population at just above 150,000, making it the 6th largest city in the United States. A vast majority of these people worked or lived in the small riverfront basin. For 1818 comparison to other Western cities, St. Louis had about 75,000 residents, and Chicago at that time only had 30,000. According to the 1858 Williams Directory, Cincinnati had 50 livery stables, 75 blacksmith shops, 120 bakers, 750 grocers, and even more saloons, supporting the daily needs of over 100,000 people crammed into that 2 square mile. The Cincinnati Basin was the second most densely populated area outside of Manhattan, New York. This industrial development gave rise to a fairly large middle and professional class of Cincinnatians that were looking for some form of outdoor recreation and a way to spend their free time. Cricket and baseball had already been played in the city, so it should have been no surprise to find an article in a Cincinnati newspaper. The game of baseball had been played in the eastern cities for probably the last 15 to 20 years. And if Cincinnati was going to keep its status as an elite US city, it needed baseball. An article from July 22nd in 1858 stated, "We are pleased to see that this old national game is about to be introduced to this locality. A club has been formed, and the first trial of skills will take place tomorrow upon East Walnut Hills. Several of the members have belonged to crack Eastern clubs." Well, this just kind of baffled me. First of all, who are these crack players from Eastern clubs, and why were they playing in East Walnut Hills? Having grown up in Cincinnati in the folklore that all baseball was played on the west side in the broad flood-prone plains of the Mill Creek. Oh, this just sounded like heresy. Not up on the northeastern hills that were not even a part of the city in 1858. It took almost an hour to even get to that area in one of the few horse-drawn omnibus that serviced that location. The July 26th article titled "Baseball," the first game by a newly organized club, was played on Walnut Hills last Friday. There were 9 players on the side, and the contest is said to have been an exciting and spirited affair. But as we have not been furnished with a score, we cannot lay it before the obvious for such matters. A gentleman who is present in the game and who is well posted in baseball and cricket declares the play would not have disgraced the celebrated New York club. The players adopted the manly and scientific method of catching the ball without waiting for it to touch the ground, the same system employed by the majority of cricketers. The club will play another match game upon the grounds someday this week. Now, obviously and unfortunately, there's no club name and there's no players mentioned. But the reference of catching the ball on the fly may mean that they could have been familiar with that style of play, so maybe they were cricket players. It should also be noted that just below the baseball summary was a report of a town ball match played by the Excelsiors on the July 25th. So were the town ball players playing on the same field that the baseball match had been played on? As I kind of looked through different places of access, I could not find that any researcher had actually followed up in detail on the location. The July 26th article was referenced in Protoball as the first game played in Cincinnati, so that all matched up, but there was really no other information. So I decided I really wanted to take a closer look at this whole situation. I started the search for the actual location of the map of the match, since I at least had a name, East Walnut Hills, as being an area that it was played in. My next clue came from the Cincinnati Commercial Tribune in a July 29th article that indicated another baseball match would be played at the Union Cricket Club on the following day. In addition, I found notices for 2 more matches on August 6th and August 20th. So a total of 4 matches from July 23rd through August 20th were played, and they were all at the Union Cricket Club in East Walnut Hills. Well, now obviously I needed to learn more about this Union Cricket Club. I had actually never heard of it before. The Cincinnati Enquirer had an article from November the 5th of 1856 that announced the formation of the cricket club 5 weeks had occurred 5 weeks earlier, with W.H. Coolidge as the president. The club had been deemed a success, and I found a number of articles that noted cricket matches being played at various locations across the city, but none of them in East Walnut Hills. So I'm now baffled what the connection is. Finally, in an article from April 12, 1858, the Cincinnati Daily Commercial had a notice that the Cincinnati Union Cricket Club had leased a fine 5-acre lot on East Walnut Hills, enclosed with a fence and other suitable improvements. On May 5th, a story was carried that touted the inauguration of the new Union Cricket grounds with a grand gala day. All were invited. Omnibuses were to run every hour on the hour, starting from Sycamore Street between 5th and 6th. And it also noted that the location was on Madison Pike, across from the 1 Mile House. Well, this gave me some more information, and so I started looking at 1858 maps. And I found this, which kind of talks about or shows the general area. Cincinnati is down to the bottom and to the left, the center of the city. So this is Madison Road, or Pike as it was called then, that runs out of the city. So this area was known as East Walnut Hills. So at least I had an area and a road as a benchmark. So I was very determined that having the name of the business, the 1 Mile House, would help me find the exact location of where these games were played. I used 2 different newspaper search sites, and I found a number of hits using the 1 Mile House in Cincinnati, but none gave an actual location. As I was doing that search, I did come across this interesting picture, and this was from September 21st of 1859, basically about a year later. And it's in the Cincinnati Penny Press, and it shows the Union Cricket Grounds with a cricket match under play. You can see the players out here. It also revealed that the grounds were located at a corner of 2 streets. This is one of the streets running in this direction. And interestingly enough, over here in this corner is the omnibus, horse-drawn omnibus coming down. So this tells me that this was a corner lot in that area. Finally, after a number of weeks of searching, I found in this 1876 listing in the Cincinnati Enquirer that at least for the premises known as the 1 Mile House on the southwest corner of Madison Pike and Hackberry Street had been given. Now I had the exact location, and I was even familiar with the area. It was known locally as DeSales Corner due to the large church that was there, and Hackberry was just the next street to the east. I also recalled that a high school, Miss Purcell Marion, was located on Hackberry. This next photo shows the location as it exists today. This road running from right to left is Madison Pike, and the one going off to the north is Hackberry. So the corner that we would have been looking from would have been from the north to the south. So it had been in the reverse that we're looking here. You can see the high school back here, and this lot extends all the way down. I am attempting to work with local historical societies. I'd like to get a marker of some sort placed to recognize that this is the location of a significant event in both Cincinnati and baseball history. So I was happy to solve that location, and it took some time, but it was not too difficult. So I thought, well, I might as well figure out who all the players were that participated. I was still intrigued by this idea that they were elite Eastern players in Cincinnati in 1858. So I decided to start with the players in the Union Cricket Club, since the matches were held on their home grounds, and the reference to the tendency of catching the ball and fly would indicate experience in cricket. As most of you know, in 1858, the rules of baseball allowed that a fair or foul ball caught on the first bound was an out. So by searching the newspaper articles, I produced a list of 26 players that were named in cricket matches. I developed genealogical profiles for 17 of these players. Now, 9 of them, there just was not enough information. I mean, other than their name, I couldn't find them in Family Tree. I couldn't find them in Williams directories. But I figured, well, 17 was a pretty good sample. In developing those profiles, I found that 9 of the cricket players were immigrants who had come to Cincinnati directly after arriving from the US. 7 were English, 1 was Irish, and 1 was German. 5 of them were native-born Cincinnatians. 2 were born in New York State, and there was 1 from South Carolina. So as I looked at them, where they were living and when they came to Cincinnati, I really couldn't find anything that would make me believe that they were playing baseball in 1858. But I also recognize that excluding them just based on their physical location probably wasn't the best filter. So I decided to expand my research to include all bat and ball games that were played in Cincinnati from 1858 to 1867, using the newspapers and Harry Eldridge's book, History of Baseball in Cincinnati. I figured this would give me a view of an individual across 10 years of time and possible insights into his preference of play. So this effort resulted in a worksheet, really a file, that has 1,317 entries. Of that, about 540 are specific individual names. This is a typical file from that page. I didn't pick it for any special reason other than to show you the names were listed as exactly as they showed up. And obviously, there were some cases where there were just first or last names, initials, misspellings, but I wrote it exactly as it existed. I then showed the club that they were connected with. I showed what the sport that they were playing, either baseball, cricket, or town ball. The year that the notice was from, it was from the newspaper, or if it was from the Eldridge book, and then what their role in that date of action was. Like in the second guy, he was named as a club vice president. It appears that he might have also been a player in a cricket match in 1865. So that's what I developed, thinking I'm going to try to capture everyone that was involved in sports over that 10-year time period. What this listing, when it was completed, I did go back and look at the cricket players, and what I found was that no cricket player from 1858 ever participated in the next 10 years in either town ball or baseball. So that reinforces my belief that probably the cricket club was not the source of players. They may have provided the field, but they probably did not participate. So I thought possibly finding the crack Eastern players might be a little more easy. So I then used Marshall D. Wright's The National Association of Baseball Players, 1857 to 1870, and Peter Morris's et al. Baseball Pioneers, 1850 to 1870, as a cross-check for the names of players from the sources, from these sources, against all of the bat and ball players that were active in that time period. The reason for this was I'm thinking if a player was in fact in Cincinnati in 1858 and he stayed there, he probably would be prone to participate as time went on, as the interest in baseball finally exploded in later years. Unfortunately, that approach did not yield any matches. Out of those 540 unique names, I found none that matched any of the names from the 2 reference books, which to my knowledge is probably the best 2 places to look for who was playing baseball in 1857, 1858. So I decided I was going to take with a grain of salt the term crack Eastern player and think that probably the writer of the article may have exaggerated the credentials somewhat. So still trying to think of how to crack this nut. I'm rereading the July 26th article, and I've started thinking about the gentleman who was identified as being present and well posted on baseball and cricket, and considered that he might be a contributor to the New York Clipper. Now, the Clipper had been running reports of Cincinnati Town Ball for some time. So I figured there had to be a source for that information, and they could have, I don't know, they called them stringers then, whatever. So I thought, well, maybe he wrote a story that he filed with the Clipper that did not make the Cincinnati papers or the surrounding area. So I checked for the month after the first games were played. And unfortunately, the only articles of any significance attached to Cincinnati was the unfortunate death of a man who was participating in a speed walking race. So that again yielded no information on the specific individuals. So after that, I decided, okay, I'm going after the town ball players. So I had a fair amount of information on the town ball players because there were a number of games that were in the paper. The Gymnasts and the Excelsior clubs were very active in Cincinnati in that time period. Across the river in Newport and Covington, they had some. They were also had some very strong clubs. Surely these players were aware of the New York game, and I thought it wasn't unreasonable to assume that they might want to give it a try. As I said, I had the benefit of a large database on them, and so what I decided was I would take any town ball players from 1858 and then see if they continued to play town ball or baseball as the time went on. So, or if they may have played town ball and then dropped out and then started playing baseball when it again became popular. Well, at least I yielded something. I found one name. That name is a strange one. Bodo Otto Morgan de Beck, shown usually in the newspapers as B.O.M. de Beck. In 1858, he was a player and side captain for the Gymnast Club and is listed in numerous town ball games during 1858. 8 years later, on September 29th, 1866, he was playing first base for the Cincinnati Buckeyes when they played the Cincinnati Baseball Club for the very first time. He was also listed in other games during with the Buckeyes in 66 and 67. So he was active in both town ball and in baseball. I do want to make a side note here. The Gymnast Club that he played for was made up from members of the Young Men's Gymnastic Association, and they were established in 1853. And that organization still survives today as the Cincinnati Athletic Club. So a couple words about Baum, as I call him. Baum de Beck was born March 30th in 1830 in Gloucester County, New Jersey, which is across the river from Philadelphia. His family moved to Cincinnati when he was 11, graduated from Old Woodward High School, and is listed as a teacher in the 1850 census. Both of his younger brothers, William Loomis and Jesse Parker DeBeck, joined him in playing town ball with the gymnast club. All three brothers served in the Civil War, and in his baseball career, he continued as a board member. He obviously was not playing in 58 and 59, but he did stay with the Buckeyes until they folded at the end of the 69 season. And while none of this ties him directly to the 58 ball games played in East Walnut Hills, I found him to be such an interesting personality at the time, I had to give him some recognition. As I said, I did some pretty deep dives on the genealogy side of some of these people, and some of them were fascinating in terms of what they did in addition to being involved in some of the sports. Well, I was getting down to the short hairs in terms of what I could use to try to find these people. So I decided as a last resort to turn to the hometown favorite, father of Cincinnati baseball, Matthew McKay Yorston. Now, credit for this title was first brought forward in Harry Eldridge's book, History of Baseball in Cincinnati. And in it, Eldridge describes Yorston as teaching people how to play baseball and even making baseballs and bats because none were available in 1860. Well, since the game was in 1858, at 1860's close, and Eldridge was writing 50 events 50 years prior, I decided, okay, I'm going to really look into Yorston. I confirmed he was born in Glasgow, Scotland, on September 5th, 1842. And at the age of 9, he and his parents migrated to the US, arriving in New Orleans. They traveled up the Mississippi and Ohio River and settled in Louisville, Kentucky. In 1855, Matthew was sent to school in Rochester, New York, and then he went to Cincinnati in 1859. He was first listed in the Williams Cincinnati Directory in 1860 as a clerk in the drugstore. He was named as a member of a 1861 Buckeye club that had formed briefly in Cincinnati and may or may not have actually been playing baseball. His time in Rochester, though, could have exposed him to baseball because Rochester during that time was coming up with some of their first clubs. But the fact that his arrival times, which I've substantiated from a couple different sources, were not until after 1858, precludes him from being involved in that 1858 match. But I'll say this, the fact that, here's Matthew, the fact that he appeared in Eldridge's book, even up to and after his death, he was touted in the local newspapers as being the father of baseball in Cincinnati. I probably found in the tri-state area at least 5 or 6 different eulogies of him, all of which quoted almost directly from Eldridge's book. So they were just basically copying what Eldridge had written in his book. He did play some ball. He was active with the Live Oaks after the Civil War, but he actually played very sparingly in baseball matches. So the touching base on the Buckeye Club that I had mentioned earlier, that club had been supposedly formed in March of '61. And I did find in the New York Clipper that they reported the officials that were elected in April of '61, but there was no mention of them ever playing any games. I do believe that the start of the Civil War impacted this Buckeye club. And the fact that they used the term baseball in their organizational name, I'm not sure that they truly were playing baseball. But regardless of that, there was no information that ever appeared in that that they ever played a match. So I think they got formed and very quickly because the Civil War disbanded. Now, in 1863, the Buckeye Town Ball Club was formed, and they clearly were playing town ball. You could look at the results in the papers and tell that they were playing town ball. Matter of fact, in the newspaper account of that first match that I mentioned earlier between the Buckeyes and the Cincinnati club, it stated that the Buckeye players in their haste to record an out were actually trying to peg or hit the Cincinnati runners with the ball. So that's a sure sign of the town ball. So while I put all these files together, I also produced files that can contain 63 town ball matches, 91 cricket matches, 131 baseball matches that were played between 1858 and 1867. Now, only about a quarter of these articles contained a full description of the match or gave the scores. Most of them were, in fact, notices of games to be played or a match that had been played. So this is what a typical page from that file on town balls would look like. And that says town balls, but well, I just noticed that. Okay, that's really the town balls were, the gymnasts, as I mentioned, were the predominant club. And you can see here, I won't spend a lot of time on these, but you can see that the telling things were I noted the number of participants on a side, and here you see 10, 11, 9, and on down here you get up into 12, and I found some as high as 17. So the number of players were not set, and in most cases there were they played the typical 4-inning match that is relevant to the town ball style of play. These are the cricket matches that were played. As I said, they were actually more town ball matches over that time, 10-year period than there were town ball, 91 total. So here it is in chronological order, dating back to, I snuck in 1856 and 57 just because that's when the cricket clubs were formed. Another interesting point that I'll make is that, sure enough, there was a cricket club named the Buckeye Cricket Club. So the Buckeye term got used on all three of the sports. And finally, we have the baseball listings. You can see the first 4 matches. I just called them the Cincinnati Baseball Club. And I used the abbreviation of CBBC for the 1866 Cincinnati Baseball Club. So from my research, this listing is the games that were reported in newspapers that were played in the Cincinnati general area. You can see I've got Kentucky, Indiana, as well as the Cincinnati area. So the one thing I would note here is, again, in the famous September 29th, 66 match. And I say famous, at least in Cincinnati. It was held, as you can see, according to the newspaper, at the cricket club at the foot of Richmond Street. I'm like, what? Another cricket club involved in baseball? What's going on? Well, I've got to take you back a few years to 1864, and a gentleman by the name of George Eldridge. I think Eldridge was one of the most influential people in the development in Cincinnati, even if all of it was not pre-planned. A lot of it was by chance, but he was right in the middle of things. He was born in Ireland, probably Dublin, came to Cincinnati, and I found a listing of him playing cricket in 1860. And by 64, he had served one term as president and had just been elected a second term. And it was noted that during his election that they were planning to relocate the cricket grounds, and that they had found a location near the Mill Creek bottoms. So it appears that he believed that cricket was going to be a dominant sport. Again, this is 1864 in Cincinnati, where everything happens a long time after it happens other places. So he also got the club to invest $5,000 for improvements to build fences and grandstands. He then doubled down on his thoughts and decided he needed the best cricket coach he could find to complement his new facility. He contacted Harry Wright, who was living in New York City and was well known in the cricket world as the son of famous cricketer Sam Wright. He offered him a contract to move to Cincinnati and manage the Union Cricket Club. Harry accepted the offer, plus $79.50 for moving expenses. And of course, Harry was well known in the New York baseball scene as well, as having played with the Knickerbockers and the Gothams and participating in the 1858 All-Star match. So this cricket club that was in the Mill Creek Bottoms in 1866 was the same cricket club where the first 4 baseball matches had been played in East Walnut Hills. So Harry arrived in Cincinnati in 65, had appeared to be a good season with this cricket club. But of course, the Civil War had ended in April, and the majority of the returning soldiers had been exposed to baseball. And by 66, new baseball clubs were being organized across the country, and Cincinnati was no exception. The Live Oaks were the first to form, followed by the Cincinnati Baseball Club and then the Buckeyes. Newport and Covington, Kentucky also had strong teams. Remember, these were all amateurs that just liked the game. They wanted the physical activity and enjoying being part of the social aspect of belonging to a club. One problem that most of the clubs faced was having a home grounds to play. At some point during the 66 season, the baseball club approached the cricket club with a deal to and requested the use of their cricket grounds to play their baseball matches. Harry Wright was also approached, some say by Aaron Champion, who was not, by the way, the first club president, but the third, to become a player manager for the baseball club. Well, Harry was actually under contract for the 66 season to the cricket club. So a deal was made that in return for $2,000 worth of improvements to the cricket club's facility, paid for by the baseball club, Harry could do double duty for both clubs. So the 66 season, as we know, was relatively short in terms of games played. Cincinnati only played 4 matches, 3 of which were against the Buckeyes. But the interest and support for baseball made it clear Cincinnati had fallen in love with baseball. During the fall and winter of 66, there were additional meetings between the two clubs, which resulted in some very interesting agreements. Harry Wright, who was again under contract to the Union Cricket Club until November of 67. You got to love Eldridge for keeping his asset under contract. He would continue as the player manager for the baseball club, but the baseball club would assume all outstanding debts of the cricket club. And both clubs also agreed a new facility needed to be built. Many researchers say that the cricket club was merged into the baseball club. This is not what happened. As the two organizations, they had actually formed a partnership. And it was clear to me that George Eller used his business skills to get the best out of this deal. So on April 1st of 1867, an agreement was signed to lease for 8 years at $2,000 a year, a lot west of Lincoln Park. And I know it's hard to see, but the point of this is that the lease was signed by both Henry Glassford, who was the first and at this time still president, and George Eller, president of the Union Cricket Club. So they both went into the lease together, but basically the baseball club had absolved the cricket club from most of their debt. So the design and construction was quickly contracted, and on July 4th, 1867, the Union grounds, complete with the Grand Duchess as the centerpiece, had a grand opening with a baseball match against Louisville. It was also the first time in Cincinnati that an admission fee had been charged. And it looks like Eldridge also got the naming rights since it was called the Union Grounds. I can't verify that, but it sure feels like it. So I'm going to, I know because of my problems at the start, we're running close. Most people know that the 67 season was pretty successful for the Cincinnati club, having lost only 1 game, but that 1 game loss was to a top Eastern club. And of course, Harry Wright's brother, George, was the captain. Score was 53-10. So it was clear that while Cincinnati had a new facility, they were making some money, they had cool uniforms, they still weren't competitive with the Eastern clubs. So the desire to build a nationally competitive club during 1868 and 69 was clearly a huge success and placed Cincinnati at the forefront of baseball. We all know the arrival of the professional players in 68 and 69, topped off by Harry coming to join the club in 69 and living with, with George coming. He lived with Harry and his family while he was playing in Cincinnati. So with that, the stage was set and the rest is history, and I'm not going to spend any time on that. One last note on Eldridge. When he passed away in 1916, he had a few special bequests and contents. So other than that, the whole contents of his home was put up for auction. The items that were put up for auction were identified as a Harry Wright uniform shirt, a red cap said to have been worn by Asa Brainerd, a rubber mouthpiece used by Doug Allison, trophy balls, and many scorebooks and business records. So it's clear that George had saved these items from back when they had the sale of all the Red Stocking memorabilia back in 1872 when they liquidated the club. So he had had them from us 45 years. There was a big bidding battle that broke out between Gary Herman, who was at that time the owner of the Cincinnati Reds, and a son of a previous owner, William Kenneth. Kenneth actually ended up and won the auction, but he agreed that he would just keep a few items in his father's memory, donate the rest back to the Cincinnati club. Unfortunately, as best as I've been able to research, it appears there was a fire at the Kenneth home and all the collection was lost. My last chart is just a quick summary of the 10-year time period, and I think it kind of puts a number of things in perspective. Cricket just kind of kept rolling along, and except for 62, it really never stopped playing games. And I think part of that was the makeup of the players. As I mentioned, a number of them were English and probably did not even enlist in the Civil War. Town ball took off like a rocket ship in 58, trended down, was pretty dormant during the Civil War. It did come back in 66 for a few matches, but not much. The red line, with the exception of this tiny blip, the 4 games in 1858, I found no other mention of any baseball match being played between 1858 and 1866, except for the 4. Now, I'm not saying that there weren't games played, but they were not recorded, they were not reported, and I've yet to find any trace of them. So with that, I would say that I did find the location of the event, but I failed miserably in trying to put names with those on those players who participated. I strongly believe they were town ball people, but I can't substantiate that. I have developed a more detailed understanding of the sporting interests in Cincinnati and found many bits and pieces, much of which I actually could not include because there was so much information out there, but I tried to boil it down as best I could. So I hope that it's provided a clearer story for you as well. And my parting comment is only that just think about it. Would George Wright, the best ball player in the country, had ever come to Cincinnati if George Ellard had not brought Harry to head the cricket club in 65? What a great alternative history book that would make. Thank you very much.
Larry, thank you for the presentation. A lot of information there, and the evolution of the game in Cincinnati and its growth. A couple of questions. Larry McCray asked if there were any unusual reports of on-field rules for baseball or town ball that you came across.
I don't know. I don't know
Okay.
what my stuff is. I don't know.
Jack Seltzer just made a note when you had your photograph of the ballpark site in the Western Hills that the school was the Purcell Marion High School. I know you mentioned that it was a school out there. And Eric Miklich just made a comment about when you made earlier in your talk, you talked about the fly ball rule that was being equated that to the cricket club. Could that also have been kind of early baseball or something from the Knickerbockers that has come across, and there was some early baseball that wasn't called that?
Well, Bob, I said that because the article said not to disgrace the celebrated New York club. And I would take that to be the Knickerbockers at that time.
Okay. Larry, is there anything that came across in your research that might speak to that? Larry? You're not muted, but I don't know if you're hearing me. Hold on, there's another. Larry, we've lost audio. So Peter, I want to thank Larry, and I did appreciate it. It's kind of interesting to see how these various town ball, cricket, and baseball in a 10-year period, how that turned out to be. You look at that graph that closed everything. You know, baseball just took over the world in Cincinnati. Peter, go ahead.
Yes, I just want to say to Larry, I don't know if he can hear me, but I want to say to him that I hope
Yes, Larry.
that
Yeah, I'm sorry. I cannot hear anything. I can't find
You're back on.
the,
We can hear you now.
you can hear me.
Go ahead and speak.
Great. Well, no, I think.
You can hang up. You can hang
Okay,
up.
okay, so I want to just say to
I can't
Larry
hear
that
you.
if he can hear me or not.
Okay.
I hope that this.
So my problem is I can't hear you guys and I can't find an unmute anywhere. I can,
Okay, thank you. I just want to thank Larry
and
and
the unmute button, but it doesn't change anything.
We can hear you, Larry.
okay, I just want to thank Larry and just say I hope that this research somehow ends up in the hands, particularly those sheets and that data of all those individuals, somehow ends up in the hands of Cincinnati Historical Society, because it is really, really a great history of the city of Cincinnati in a sense, really getting to those names. And like Peter Morris likes to say, sometimes it becomes a cold case and somebody happens to pick them up years from now and see what who's who on that list. I want to mention that next month we're going to be having Rob Bauer, December the 14th, a Tuesday evening, doing a presentation on the decline and fall of the American Association, which is as I understand it, I'm looking forward to that presentation because I have some understanding of what happened to the American Association, but it'd be very, very interesting to hear his presentation as he gets into detail. I also want to mention that this Saturday and Sunday is our Brooklyn 19th Century Baseball Interdisciplinary Symposium. It'll be virtual. You do have to register for it. There's a $15 pay through SABR, through the SABR website, and you can register for that event. And if you choose to do so, please do so by midnight local time Thursday, because on Friday they'll send out the link. It'll include a full day program from about noontime Eastern noontime until about 5:30 or so in the evening, and then it'll come back for about 60 to 90 minutes of a virtual tour of historic Brooklyn sites that was put together by Tom Gilbert. It's like a video tour. And finally, for those interested, the Fred is under construction right now, and we're putting together that conference. Our January 1st winter edition of our newsletter that Bob puts out quarterly. We'll have all of the information about the upcoming 2022 Fred, which will be planned for Cooperstown on April the 29th and 30th. So that's when registration for that will begin. Okay, I think that's it. And Bob, I want to thank you again, and Larry. I don't know if
Okay,
you can hear me now, but I
if
thank you
you,
again.
if you can believe it, I finally found the switch.
Oh, you got
I
it.
hope I
Okay.
didn't miss, I hope I didn't miss many of Eric's questions. He can always send them to me by email.
I do that.
Okay,
Okay. Well, Larry, thank you. And I just hope everything ends up in the Cincinnati Historical Society because you did
yes,
tremendous work.
yes. Thank you. It will.
Okay. Bob, thank you again.
Thank everybody for coming. We'll see you all next month.
See you. Thank you.
All right. Welcome. Nick. See you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.